Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has urged the nation to exercise caution to tackle a second wave of coronavirus. He was addressing the media after chairing a meeting of the National Coordination Committee in Islamabad. The Prime Minister said people need to strictly follow anti-COVID measures as cases in the country have increased by 4 times. 19 people have lost their lives to the virus overnight, taking the death tally to 7,160. Pakistan has rejected India's denial of the evidence on New Delhi's state sponsorship of terrorism. In a statement, the Foreign Office says that India is resorting to its typical methods of denials and obfuscation after being exposed. It said the dossier documents details of India's financing and execution of terror activities against Pakistan. In Afghanistan, heavy clashes are ongoing between the government forces and the Taliban in northern Kunduz province's Dasht-e-Archi district. The defense ministry says areas in the district where the fighting continues will soon be cleared of the fighters. Earlier, the Taliban claimed to have overrun 8 government checkpoints, killing and wounding a number of soldiers. The UN-brokered Libya talks have been postponed until next week. Head of the UN mission in Libya, Stephanie Williams, says lack of consensus on who will lead the transition process led to the delay. Earlier, rival Libyan sides had agreed a ceasefire, power sharing and elections. In the United States, COVID-19 infections have crossed 11 million, while the virus has claimed over 246,000 lives in the country. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is self-isolating after coming into contact with someone who tested positive for the virus. In India, 435 people have died since yesterday, bringing the country's death toll to over 130,000. Globally, the virus has claimed over 1.31 million lives and infected over 54.3 million people so far. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has urged the nation to exercise caution to tackle a second wave of the coronavirus. He was addressing the media after chairing a meeting of the National Coordination Committee in Islamabad. The Prime Minister said people need to strictly follow anti-COVID measures as cases in the country have increased by 4 times. He said Pakistan managed to avoid the devastation that coronavirus caused in other countries during the first wave. Meanwhile, 19 people have lost their lives to the virus overnight, taking the death tally to 7,160. According to the Health Ministry, there are over 28,000 active cases in the country. Pakistan has rejected India's denial of the evidence on New Delhi's state sponsorship of terrorism. In a statement, the Foreign Office said India is resorting to its typical methods of denials and obfuscation after being exposed. It said the dossier lays bare India's planning, financing and execution of terror activities against Pakistan. He said it is the collective responsibility of the world community to hold India to account. Earlier, the Foreign Office briefed envoys of the US, China, France and Russia on the dossier of Indian state terrorism. In Afghanistan, heavy clashes are ongoing between the government forces and the Taliban in northern Kunduz province's Dasht-e-Archi district. The defense ministry says the areas in the district where the fighting continues will soon be cleared of the fighters. A spokesman for the Kunduz governor said the clashes started after the Taliban attacked security forces in the district. He said 3 security personnel were killed and as many wounded in the ongoing clashes. The spokesperson said Air Force is also supporting the security forces in the clashes. Earlier, the Taliban claimed to have overrun 8 government checkpoints, killing and wounding a number of soldiers. The UN broker Libya talks have been postponed until next week. Head of the UN mission in Libya, Stephanie Williams, says lack of consensus on who will lead the transition process led to the delay. Williams said the 10-year conflict cannot be resolved in a week. She said the participants will meet again via video conference in 7 days to agree on the election of the executive authority. Earlier, rival Libyan sides had agreed to a ceasefire, power sharing and elections. However, it is yet to be decided who will lead the country into the December 24th elections. The Ethiopian government says its forces have liberated a town in the northern Tigray region. The government's emergency task force claims that Tigray leaders fled the town, taking along around 10,000 prisoners. Earlier, Tigray forces fired rockets into neighboring Eritrea, escalating a 13-day conflict. The U.S. has denounced attacks by Ethiopia's rebellious Tigray region on neighboring Eritrea. Yesterday, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission said at least 34 people were killed when gunmen opened fire on a passenger bus. It says there are reports of similar attacks in other parts of the region. Hundreds of people from both sides have been killed in clashes. Over in the United States, President Donald Trump has briefly acknowledged losing the election in a Twitter post. He said Joe Biden won because the election was rigged. The U.S. president later backtracked, saying he did not concede anything and there was a long way to go. After golfing in Virginia, he pledged to file big cases challenging the election results. He alleged the lawsuits will display outrage at things that were done to change the outcome. Legal experts have said the Trump litigation stands little chance of altering the election's outcome. And election officials of both the parties have said there is no evidence of major irregularities. Meanwhile, Trump's campaign has dropped parts of a lawsuit it filed to halt results in Pennsylvania. French President Emmanuel Macron has called for independent and sovereign European defense strategy other than NATO. Talking to media, Macron said he completely disagrees with Germany's stance of keeping the EU's security dependent on the US. He said the US will only respect the EU as allies if the bloc was serious about its own position. Macron said the EU needs to continue to build up their own autonomy, just as the US and China does for themselves. Earlier, German defense minister said the EU will have to depend on US military protection for the near future. Japan says it has been maintaining behind-the-scenes negotiations with the rival North Korea through the changing administrations. Japan's Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi said Tokyo engages in backdoor diplomacy with Pyongyang through its embassy in China. Motegi added dialogue with North Korea aims to address Tokyo's apprehensions on Pyongyang's nuclear and missile developments. He said the talks also discussed the long-standing issue of Japanese citizens abducted by North Korean agents decades ago. Motegi also said Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga has indicated willingness to hold face-to-face talks with Kim Jong-un. In Hong Kong, 7 people have died and several others are critically injured in a fire at an apartment building. Police say a 9-year-old child is among the dead. Rescue officials say the blaze has completely burned the building in Yau Ma Tei City. Authorities say the cause of the fire is still unknown. The fire is the deadliest in Hong Kong's history in almost a decade. The US has recorded more than 11 million COVID-19 cases and around 246,000 deaths. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 1.3 million lives and infected over 54 million people so far. More in this report.
The world stays horror-stricken as coronavirus continues to devastate lives. Latin America presents a harrowing picture, with Peru set to become the 5th regional state to hit 1 million cases. The virus continues to thrash the US, with 1 million new cases recorded in just 6 days. Michigan and Washington states have yet again imposed sweeping restrictions on gatherings to slow the spread. Meanwhile, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has decided to move the court amid a row with President Donald Trump over vaccine distribution.
The Trump administration's proposed plan is such an affront. I tell you today, if the Trump administration does not change this plan and does not provide an equitable vaccine process, we will enforce our legal rights. We will bring legal action to protect New Yorkers.
Meanwhile, Europe is struggling to identify the source of cluster infections, making it hard for nations to impose targeted restrictions. Research shows COVID-19 may have been circulating in Italy as early as summer 2019. Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is self-isolating after coming in contact with someone who tested positive for the virus. Cases continue to spike in France, Germany, and Austria despite broad lockdowns.
This lockdown is as restrictive as the previous one, as the main idea is the same. All non-essential trips are prohibited. There are exceptions, but any non-essential trip is forbidden because anyone can contribute to spreading the virus. Our message has not changed. The only small difference with the first lockdown is that people are allowed to take their children to school.
Coronavirus keeps battering the Korean peninsula as well, as South Korean officials warn the situation is taking a very dangerous turn after the country reported more than 200 cases for the 3rd consecutive day. Meanwhile, in a rare development, North Korea broadcasted COVID-19 precautionary measures on its national TV. India has recorded 435 deaths overnight, pushing the death toll across 130,000.
In Moldova, opposition candidate Maia Sandu has won the presidential election after a runoff vote against the incumbent Igor Dodon. According to the Election Commission, Sandu won 57.7% of the votes compared to Dodon's 42.2%. Dodon says he would concede defeat if local courts find no violations in the vote count. Final results are expected to be announced within 5 days. Sandu, who favors closer ties with the European Union, will be the country's first female president. Syria's top diplomat and longtime foreign minister Walid al-Muallim has passed away in the country's capital, Damascus. Syrian authorities paid tribute to al-Muallim, saying he was known for his honorable, patriotic positions for the country. The 79-year-old veteran diplomat was suffering heart problems and poor health for many years. He was first appointed the Syrian foreign minister in 2006. Al-Muallim also served as deputy prime minister and Syrian envoy to the United States. So time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. 3 people have died and 16 others are missing as landslides due to torrential rains ravaged parts of Colombia. Flooding has affected 11 municipalities of Colombia's Choco and Atlántico province. National Unit for Disaster Risk Management says the landslide buried houses in Antioquia province. Hundreds of people were evacuated by helicopter. Met Office forecasts heavy rains over the next 30 days across the country. President Ivan Duque visited affected areas.
The meteorology body has told us that we will have at least 30 days of intense rains. So we need families to go to shelters, understand that the risks have not gone away, and in the meantime, we will continue to provide humanitarian support as well as other tools that the national government has at hand, together with the local government.
Nicaragua is evacuating its islands and coastal areas as Category 2 Hurricane Iota approaches. A U.S. National Hurricane Center says Iota is traveling with maximum sustained winds of 161 kilometers per hour. The center says the storm is expected to bring catastrophic winds and extreme rainfall impacts to Central America. Authorities say Iota could exacerbate the massive destruction of Hurricane Eta. The earlier storm caused flooding and mudslides that destroyed crops and killed scores of people from Panama to southern Mexico.
In the same way that we face everything, implementing actions to guarantee the safety of people, families, and communities is important. One of the measures that was done the day before yesterday in the afternoon was the suspension of sailing, especially with artisanal fishing, even if the vessel is medium in size.
Santa Claus visits the Dead Sea ahead of the Christmas season. He wants to bring some Christmas cheer during the COVID-19 pandemic. More in this report.
At the lowest point on Earth, in the middle of a giant salt lake where animals and plants have no chance of surviving, a jolly man dressed in red with a flowing white beard stuck a Christmas tree in the ground and went for a swim. Santa rowed a paddle boat a few hundred meters offshore to a spot where salt has piled up in massive mushroom shape. This allowed him to stand in the middle of the otherwise much deeper lake.
Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas from the Dead Sea! I wish you health and safety with this crazy situation what we pass in COVID-19. Come here to the Dead Sea and have a safe and relaxed time. Ho, ho, ho!
He struck a pose for cameras and then enjoyed an effortless float in the Dead Sea's famous saline-rich waters. Beyond the compelling landscape, Christianity has roots in the Dead Sea, whose surroundings are abundant with remains of ancient Christian communities. The Christmas tree, however, had no chance of surviving in the salty waters, and Santa took it with him when he returned to shore.
A 2-year-old Belgian racing pigeon called New Kim sets a new world record by reaching over $1.6 million at auction. The price is even more exceptional considering the bird is a female. More in this report.
A racing pigeon, considered one of the best ever, has been sold for a record $1.6 million in Belgium. Offers for the pigeon had already hit 1.32 million euros earlier this week, surpassing the 1.25 million euros set in March 2019 for another Belgian pigeon, Armando. Offers raised even higher in a frantic last 30 minutes of bidding.
We can already say that this record price is unbelievable because this is a female. Armando was a male. Usually a male is worth more than a female because it can produce more offsprings, more children. So it's very exceptional to have a female for this price. We did not expect that the pigeon would go so high.
Bidding started at 200 euros but rose to 1.31 million euros last week within 90 minutes. Two wealthy Chinese men later fought it out on Sunday. Chinese enthusiasm for long-distance racing of homing pigeons has driven prices up sharply.
You have like 20,000 pigeon fanciers in a very small country competing to each other on a very high level. It's like a Champions League. So it means if you are the best here, you really have good pigeons.
In 2018, an auction took place at the Pioneer Club in Beijing, where it is believed that a racing pigeon, James Legend, was sold for 2.78 million euros. However, the sale of James Legend was not officially registered, leaving the title for world record up for grabs.
China says the U.S. should stop its unreasonable suppression of Chinese firms. Beijing was responding to Washington's decision to ban U.S. investments in firms tied to the Chinese military. China's Commerce Ministry asserts that Beijing firmly opposes Washington's actions. In an executive order last week, President Donald Trump accused China of increasingly exploiting U.S. investors. He said Beijing is using it to finance the development and modernization of its military. The ban is to go into effect in January. China's factory output rose faster than expected in October and retail sales gained momentum. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, industrial production climbed 6.9% in October from a year earlier. This was in line with September's gain and faster than expected rise of 6.5%. The improved appetite for spending was seen with China's auto sales growing 12.5% in October. The Bureau says growth is expected to accelerate in the fourth quarter as the service sector recovery maintains its pace. Meanwhile, foreign direct investment expanded 18.3% year-on-year in October. This marked the seventh consecutive month for the country to see positive growth in FDI. Japanese economy has expanded at its fastest pace in at least 40 years in the third quarter of 2020. The country's rebound from COVID-19 led to 5% growth, exceeded expectations of a 4.4% rise. At an annualized rate, Japan's economy grew 21.4% in the 3 months through September. This makes the scale of its rebound a little weaker than those of other advanced economies. In a sign of severe damage wreaked by the pandemic, Asia's largest advanced economy is still almost 6% smaller than it was a year ago. With virus resurgence likely to keep a lid on further export and consumption gains, the government is making plans to add to stimulus. European markets are trading higher as investors rally around Asian market gains to recover losses. The pan-European stock 600 added over 0.5%, with the bank stocks jumping over 2.5%. London's FTSE 100 too has gained more than 0.5%. In Italy, the FTSE MIB climbed nearly 1%. The CAC 40 in Paris has added over 0.5%, while Frankfurt's DAX is trading higher too. Earlier, all Asian stocks traded higher over optimism regarding the regional comprehensive. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.